Why on earth did the head referee retire from the game right after officiating the absolute biggest match of his entire career? Slavko Vinčić just answered that critical question in a raw interview that is going to shake up the soccer world. And what he confesses explains several bizarre moments the entire world watched in that final. Things that absolutely nobody knew how to explain until today. You need to stay until the very end to find out the dark truth that nobody else will ever tell you about that final match. Slavko Vinčić is 46 years old. He is Slovenian, and up until just a few days ago, he was easily the most famous referee on earth because he controlled the massive World Cup final between Spain and Argentina. It was easily the most watched game in the history of the sport, the legendary match that ended with Ferran Torres scoring in extra time to give Spain their second trophy. Why did Argentina fail to record a single shot on target during the 90-minute final? What made Enzo Fernandez break down in tears right before he stepped onto the pitch? The one man who saw everything from the inside has finally broken his silence. Be sure to hit like and subscribe right now, because the shocking answers to these questions are things absolutely nobody else is going to tell you. Then share this with anyone who thinks they know everything. This past Monday, he suddenly announced that he was retiring. The global soccer community received that shocking news with absolute disbelief because Vinčić, who had just finished refereeing the most important match of his entire career, was currently at the absolute peak of his professional life. In fact, the International Federation of Football History and Statistics ranked him as the best referee on earth. He just won a major award in Italy, and his face was on every single cover. And yet, he walked away without offering any real explanations in his brief official statement. It was the sharp brevity of a man who has secrets to share, but is choosing his moment very carefully. That exact moment finally arrived this week. A reporter from a local Slovenian news outlet sat down with him for a candid conversation, and Vinčić knew right from the very start that this discussion was going to be completely different from any interview he had ever done before. Because in this specific interview, Vinčić spoke with raw truth, completely dropping the carefully measured language of an active official who weighs every single syllable just to avoid getting into trouble with the league, choosing instead the raw honesty of a retired official who has absolutely nothing left to lose. He is done with the game, and the massive weight he has carried inside since that fateful final night has simply become too heavy to keep bearing in complete silence. What Vinčić revealed during this discussion explains several strange occurrences that the world saw during the final, but could never quite make sense of. What caused Enzo Fernandez to cry right before stepping onto the pitch? Why did Argentina, who stormed into the final as the highest-scoring team in the entire tournament, fail to put a single shot on target for 90 whole minutes? Why did Lionel Messi give that incredibly strange team talk right before kickoff? And why, at the very end of the game when Spain was already celebrating as the champion, did a massive physical clash erupt between both teams, causing chaotic post-match scenes that absolutely nobody on the outside knew how to explain? Every single bit of this has an explanation, and Vinčić lays it bare. But to truly grasp his confession, you first have to understand the tense background of how this entire tournament unfolded. We are talking about a World Cup tournament that was plagued by major refereeing controversies from the very first match day. Highly questionable decisions that consistently ended up favoring Argentina in multiple matches. Furious complaints poured in from rival national teams that felt deeply robbed, submitting formal claims that FIFA quickly swept under the rug without a single explanation. But this pattern of behavior was no accident, and Vinčić explains it with the brutal clarity of someone who witnessed it all from the inside. He reveals that Gianni Infantino arrived at this World Cup fully aware that this was his absolute final year serving as the president of FIFA, and that he harbored a secret obsession for a long time. He never spoke of it publicly, but many high-ranking officials inside the organization knew exactly what it was. He desperately wanted to deliver another World Cup trophy to Lionel Messi before the legend finally retired, before the clock ran out entirely. Gianni Infantino, who spent years carefully building his public image around the biggest stars in the sport, wanted this to be his absolute grand finale as president, ensuring that the greatest player in soccer history would lift his second World Cup trophy in his final appearance for Argentina. And to pull that off, he desperately needed the match officials to cooperate. Not in every single game, mind you, but only when it mattered most. Only when Argentina found themselves in trouble and required a helpful shove that they could not get through fair play alone. That is exactly what Vinčić confesses took place during the tournament. And that central motive is what explains the massive controversies that fans and analysts have been tracking week after week since the tournament first kicked off. We saw highly biased decisions favoring Argentina and official protests filed by nations like Egypt, Switzerland, and Colombia. It was a clear pattern that fans pointed out for 6 straight weeks, which FIFA denied in every press release. Yet Vinčić confirms that this pattern was very real. He knew it for a fact because he was among the select group of elite officials handpicked by FIFA to referee these tournament matches. They chose officials with the proven ability to handle high-pressure matches without attracting too much public suspicion, and these directives were never actually written down on paper. Instead, they were delivered through private conversations, quiet meetings, and subtle messages that never stated anything outright, but were understood perfectly by any veteran official on the pitch. Vinčić knew the score and played along, until a sudden event occurred that he never saw coming. Just a few days before the massive World Cup final, a mysterious man knocked on the door of his room at the hotel where the entire refereeing crew was staying. Vinčić had absolutely no idea who this stranger was, having never laid eyes on him, but the visitor knew his name and knew exactly why he was standing at his door. He was a shadow operative sent by FIFA. Walking straight into the room, he sat down and coldly detailed exactly what they expected of him for that Sunday final. Argentina had to win, and Spain absolutely could not win that game. And if Vinčić did his part to make sure that happened, the reward would be massive. The emissary slid a completely blank check across the table. He told Vinčić to write down whatever number he wanted. Whatever figure he wrote down would land in his account right after the final. Once Spain was defeated and Argentina had officially lifted the World Cup trophy, Vinčić picked up the paper, staring at the blank line. This choice became the single most important decision of his life. Vinčić had been arrested during a chaotic police raid in Bosnia back in 2020, a scandal that nearly ruined his career and haunted him for years. It was a dark shadow his rivals weaponized against him whenever he made a tough call on the pitch. The media dragged that history back up every single time his name faced some new refereeing drama. That history made him highly vulnerable, and FIFA knew it. In his interview, Vinčić speaks with the quiet calm of a man who is no longer afraid of anyone using his secrets to destroy him. When they selected him to referee the World Cup final, it was not just because they thought he was the top official in the world. They wanted someone they could squeeze. If he ever thought about talking, they would just bring up Bosnia. It is much easier to control a man who is carrying a dark secret. If he ever dared to ignore their direct orders, they had the perfect leverage to silence him forever. That was the real reason behind his selection. Vinčić realized what was happening the moment he got the assignment. Everything became crystal clear when that messenger walked into his room carrying a blank check. Think about it. A person who slips into a referee's hotel room with a blank check just days before a World Cup final to influence the biggest game in generations, they do not rely on trust. They buy it with leverage when a massive bribe is not enough. Except the bribe did not work out the way that agent had planned. Vinčić actually wrote an amount on that paper, a massive sum he refuses to share in the interview. He describes the figure as easily enough to ensure an average person would never have to worry about cash again. But he did not cash it. He tucked it away to keep as cold, hard evidence of what had actually occurred in that hotel room. Absolute proof that a FIFA representative had sneaked into his room right before the biggest match of the decade, armed with a blank check to buy the World Cup final. That night, Vinčić lay wide awake. He spent hours staring blankly at the ceiling, the check sitting on his nightstand. Terrified of the explosive leverage now resting in his hands, he stared at the paper, realizing what this meant, and precisely who he needed to contact before Sunday's kickoff arrived. That man was Messi. Having never spoken to Messi outside of brief moments on the pitch, Vinčić frantically tried to reach the Argentina camp, driven by the desperate urgency of a man holding a ticking time bomb. He got inside, but not through any official channels or by requesting a formal meeting through FIFA. Direct contact would have triggered alarms. Instead, he connected through a mutual contact who had a line to Messi's inner circle, moving with the extreme secrecy of a whistleblower who knows that FIFA must never find out about this meeting. Late that evening, Vinčić slipped into the Argentina team hotel and demanded a private audience with Messi. Messi agreed to meet him. Vinčić had shared the same pitch with the superstar for years. The official knew what he was about to say in this room was something no referee had ever told a player in soccer history. The revelation he was placing on the table was going to completely shatter everything Messi expected for the coming days. They sat down, and Vinčić laid it all out. He explained the script, the orders trickling down since the opening match, and how refs were hand-picked for reasons that had nothing to do with fair play. He detailed secret meetings and quiet arrangements that the press would never be allowed to uncover. And then came the final blow, the hotel visitor and the blank check. Messi just sat there, listening in total silence. Vinčić recalls that he will never forget the look on Messi's face during those heavy minutes. He fully expected the superstar to boil over with rage and absolute shock. It was the natural reaction of someone discovering that their road to the final had been rigged. But there was no sudden outburst. He sat quiet for an eternity, staring at the floor, looking like a man trying to process a truth far too heavy to comprehend all at once. When he finally spoke, he admitted something Vinčić never saw coming. He already knew. Not the specific details of the financial offer or the agent's identity, but for weeks he had sensed that something about the tournament was deeply off. Strange, unexplainable referee decisions had been quietly eating at him, and there were matches where Argentina's wins felt so tainted he could barely celebrate, knowing in his gut that things were not clean. In the interview, Vinčić explains how he immediately knew he had made the absolute right choice by going to see him. Messi was never the kind of player who needed anyone to sit him down and explain what clean, honest football actually meant. He just lived it. That integrity was baked right into his soul since those early days back in Rosario, kicking a flat, deflated ball around the dusty streets, playing without any adults there to dictate what was fair and what was not. They spoke in private for a stretch of time that Vinčić leaves vague in the interview. But the moment that quiet conversation wrapped up, Messi made a massive decision. He looked at Vinčić and made a promise that very night he was going to bring the entire squad together under one roof. Every single one of the 23 players who had fought their way to the World Cup final with the burning dream of capturing the ultimate trophy. Messi was going to lay out exactly what Vinčić had revealed to him, and then he would tell them that Argentina was going to lose this final on purpose. They would do it fully understanding the devastating weight of that choice, what it meant for their own careers and for their families back home. And, of course, for the millions of passionate people in Argentina who had spent weeks desperately dreaming of seeing their national team win the World Cup. Hearing that, Vinčić stood there frozen, taking several long seconds just to process the words. He asked Messi if he was truly certain, if he fully understood the weight of throwing a World Cup final, a secret that could absolutely never be leaked to the public. He warned him that no one would ever thank them for this sacrifice, because nobody would ever know what they had actually done. But Messi just looked at him and answered with a quiet sentence, one that Vinčić still repeats today with a noticeably cracking voice. He told him that this beautiful game of football had given him every single thing he had in life, and the absolute least he could do was save it when it needed him most. Later that very evening, Messi called the entire team together inside the quiet meeting room at the Argentine squad's headquarters. Now, Vinčić was not in that room himself, but he knows exactly what went down because Messi shared everything with him later, detailing the conversation like someone who desperately wanted the truth recorded somewhere, even if it could never be made public. Messi laid it all out for his teammates, the corrupt plan from Infantino, the check, and the sacrifice he decided they had to make. Inside that closed room, the reaction was immediate and completely fractured. Some players openly broke down in tears. Others stood up in anger, shouting that they could not do this, that they had worked far too hard to throw everything away at the final hurdle. Yet, there were others who immediately understood the profound weight of what their captain was asking of them. They knew that the soul of football was vastly bigger than any physical trophy, that winning a tainted World Cup was no victory at all, and that if FIFA was truly this corrupt, then someone had to stand up and stop it, even if the world never knew they were the ones who did. The emotional debate dragged on for hours, until one by one, every player in the room began to accept it. Not all of them shared the same deep conviction, and certainly not the same peace of mind, but they all agreed. Once they did, Messi detailed the actual strategy. They would take the pitch, but actively avoid scoring. They would sprint, they would press hard, making it look to the entire world like they were fighting to win, but they would deliberately fail to create the kind of scoring opportunities a world-class squad normally would. They simply would not finish their chances when the actual opportunity to score presented itself. And if the match stayed scoreless through 90 minutes, one of them would have to get intentionally sent off in extra time, leaving the team with 10 men to give Spain an easier path to goal. That was when Enzo Fernandez slowly raised his hand. He volunteered to be the one to make the fatal error and take the red card, willing to carry the massive wave of criticism that was bound to follow from the global media and the angry fans, from millions of people who would never, ever know the real story of what went down inside that tense meeting room. Reflecting on this part of the story that Messi would later share with him, Vinčić made a quiet confession during his interview. He admitted that when he first heard Enzo had willingly volunteered to get sent off, the sheer emotion forced him to look away from the camera for several long, silent seconds. Because the immense sacrifice Enzo made in that room the night before the final is something the football world will never fully understand or recognize. Here was Enzo Fernandez, A young star who had arrived at this final, regarded as one of the most brilliant midfielders of his entire generation, a player who had been absolutely crucial in driving Argentina all the way to this championship stage, and at just 23 years old, with his whole professional career ahead of him, he raised his hand in that quiet room. He volunteered to bear the heaviest burden of all, to get intentionally sent off in the World Cup final, fully aware of the consequences, fully aware that the press would tear him apart without mercy, and that passionate Argentine fans would blame him entirely for the devastating loss, ensuring his name would be forever linked to the red card that left Argentina with 10 men during the most critical extra time in modern soccer history, all while never being allowed to speak the truth. And that is exactly why he was crying before even stepping out onto the pitch. To the millions watching, those tears looked like pure nerves, the overwhelming pressure of a young player about to start the biggest match of his entire life. And yes, a small part of that was true, but those tears carried a far heavier burden inside. The quiet grief of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do, fully aware of the massive cost. Yet he did it because a legendary leader like Messi asked, and because Enzo, who had spent his entire childhood idolizing Messi, knew deep down that if his hero was asking for this sacrifice, it was because it was the only right path to take. That single truth explains everything the world witnessed during that final but could never comprehend. Like Messi's visible anguish right before kickoff, it was easily the strangest detail, the one that absolutely nobody remembered, maybe because he lacked that fiery, intense energy he usually radiated when he was hungry to win. Instead, it sounded like the quiet groan of a manager preparing his squad to go down with dignity. 90 agonizing minutes without a single shot on goal from the absolute highest scoring team in the entire tournament, a squad that somehow reached the biggest, most crucial final of the entire year without creating one genuine scoring opportunity during the entire game. It left every single TV analyst completely speechless afterward, because from a purely tactical standpoint, there was zero logical explanation. Oh, there was a reason, sure, but it had absolutely nothing to do with soccer. And then came Enzo's shocking red card in the 93rd minute, a brutal foul involving Kabarski that fans everywhere blasted as a total lapse in focus. They saw it as a reckless mistake by a player who completely lost his cool at the worst possible moment. In reality, though, it was exactly what Enzo had promised to do in that closed meeting room just the night before. Down to 10 men, the Spanish squad finally found the open space they desperately needed. Ferran Torres found the net in the 106th minute, and Spain raised the golden trophy. Vinčić, who was officiating the game from the center of the pitch, confesses that in that very moment, he felt two incredibly powerful things wash over him all at once. First, there was the sheer relief of a man who knows that what was fated to happen had finally happened. But there was also the deep, heavy sadness of knowing he had just witnessed one of the greatest, most tragic dramas in soccer history, a secret story the world might never truly understand. That Lionel Messi, who stepped onto that pitch with the burning dream of capturing his second World Cup trophy, had chosen to lose the match so that the soul of soccer could win something far more precious than any physical trophy. Yet, the drama was far from over when the final whistle blew, because something else entirely was about to unfold on the damp grass of MetLife Stadium. Right as Spain launched into their wild championship celebrations, players from both squads began crossing paths on the field, and things took a dark turn. It was a moment the entire world witnessed live, yet absolutely no one knew how to interpret it correctly. A massive post-game brawl. Paredes marching aggressively toward the Spanish bench, Molina shoving Rodri in the chest, the furious screaming, the violent shoving, easily the ugliest, most chaotic scene of the entire tournament, unfolding in the dying minutes of the final. Vinčić breaks it all down in his interview, revealing a truth that absolutely nobody could have seen coming. The second the match ended, and the Spanish team began screaming in joy, several Argentine players walked straight toward them. They weren't looking to fight, they wanted to tell them something. They wanted to look them in the eye and confess the absolute truth of what had actually just happened during that final. That Argentina had deliberately let Spain walk away with the victory. That Lionel Messi had gathered the entire squad in a hotel room the night before, ordering them to lose. That Enzo had actively volunteered to get himself thrown off the pitch. That those 90 agonizing minutes without a single real shot on target were not because they ran out of tactical ideas, but a calculated sacrifice they executed while knowing exactly what they were throwing away. But the Spanish players, hearing this shocking confession in the absolute heat of the moment, and blinded by the sheer ecstasy of winning the World Cup, completely misread the message. To them, it just sounded like a pathetic, bitter excuse. They believed an Argentinian side that failed to win on the pitch was now desperately trying to steal their glory by claiming they had thrown the match on purpose. They felt their hard-fought Spanish victory, a moment they had celebrated with every ounce of their souls, was being cheapened by a wild conspiracy theory that sounded completely impossible. So, they lashed out. They reacted with the pure, defensive rage of anyone who feels like their greatest achievement is being stolen right out of their hands. It was the stinging frustration of an athlete who just poured his entire life into a match, only to be told his opponent was not even trying to play. That is precisely what lit the fuse. The chaotic post-match brawl was never about Argentina being sore losers. It was a violent misunderstanding, born from Spanish champions completely misinterpreting what the defeated Argentines were trying to confess. They took a raw, deeply honest confession as a direct, insulting provocation. They reacted the only way the human body knows how, when adrenaline is surging at its absolute peak, and someone drops a bombshell you never expected to hear. Vinčić, watching this madness unfold from the center of the pitch, admits he was desperate to step in. He wanted to halt the screaming, separate the players, and explain the unbelievable truth of what was actually going on. Yet, deep down, he knew the timing was completely wrong. Dropping a truth bomb like that in the middle of a literal riot would not have calmed a single soul. The truth would have to find another path to the light. It would take time, perhaps through this very interview he is giving now, since he is already retired and has absolutely nothing left to lose. Because Vinčić, who has spent years carrying the dark shadow of that infamous scandal in Bosnia back in 2020, reveals that for the very first time, he finally feels a sense of peace. He explains that his actions in the tense days leading up to this World Cup final were the exact opposite of his mistakes in Bosnia. Back then, he blindly stumbled into a dark room without knowing the rot hidden inside. But in that hotel room before the final, he knew exactly what was happening, and he chose to walk away. Making that hard choice cost him a massive payday. But in return, he reclaimed something priceless that he had lost so many years ago: his self-respect. Vinčić goes on to share one final detail in the interview, a revelation that stands out as the single most shocking part of his confession. He knows that Lionel Messi is not going to be remembered for this sacrifice, because the world, blind to what truly happened in that closed hotel room, will only remember Messi as the legend who fell short in his very last World Cup. For years to come, the sports media will endlessly debate whether Lionel Messi should have just walked away and retired much earlier. They will endlessly debate whether Argentina could have actually won the match with a totally different squad. They will ask if that crushing defeat against Spain was really the kind of ending that the greatest career in soccer history deserved. But Lionel Messi knows the truth, and he cannot say a word because speaking out would mean exposing Infantino and the rest of FIFA, along with the players who voted in that hotel room that night, exposing a whole corrupt system that is still fully running things today. Even though everything he chose to do was simply to ensure that this one match was played completely clean, Vinčić, who could not have spoken a word while he was still an active referee, chose retirement as the perfect moment to reveal what he knows, because he truly believes that someone finally has to tell this story. The soccer world deserves to know that on the biggest, most crucial night of the year, there was a referee who flat out rejected a blank check. They need to know about a legendary player who chose to lose the biggest final of his life just to keep the game clean, and about a young 23-year-old midfielder who raised his hand to get himself ejected, fully aware that absolutely nobody would ever thank him. Those three men actually saved the soul of soccer that night, and the rest of the world, which went on to celebrate Spain's massive victory without knowing a single thing, was only celebrating because of what those three did. Vinčić wraps up the entire interview with a single, powerful line that the reporter noted down exactly like this. He said he does not need a single person to remind him that everything he did was done strictly for the love of soccer, and to him, that is more than enough. There is one critical piece of information that absolutely must be revealed before we wrap up this story. The actual check that Vinčić hid in his hotel room that night is still out there. He never tried to cash it, but he did not tear it up either. He held on to it because back then, he realized he might actually need it one day to prove exactly what had unfolded behind closed doors, as the only piece of hard, physical evidence that a FIFA official had walked into a referee's room just days before a World Cup final, carrying cash to buy the outcome of the biggest match on earth. During the interview, he never reveals where that check is currently hidden. He only says that it is kept in a very safe place. And if one day, someone with the actual power to make a difference needs to look at that evidence, he knows exactly where to go and get it. That is precisely why this story does not just end with a simple interview. Because as long as that physical check still exists, the undeniable proof of what happened remains very real. It represents a hard truth that FIFA can never fully sweep under the rug, no matter how desperately they want to. It is the smoking gun that the entire soccer world could finally see if the situation changes, and if someone with real authority decides that the moment has come for the absolute truth to be exposed. Vinčić has no idea when that fateful day will arrive, but he admits that he does not really care whether it ever happens at all. He knows that what he did was simply the right thing to do, and nothing else matters. On the night of the final, as the Spanish players lifted the trophy, he knew in his heart that he had made the correct choice, and that peace of mind is enough to carry him through the rest of his life. Meanwhile, back in Argentina, where fans have no idea that the public is slowly learning the truth about this unbelievable story, they will keep carrying the painful weight of that defeat, the missed chances at the goal, the moment Enzo Fernandez was sent off, and that chaotic brawl at the very end. And Spain, completely oblivious to everything that went down behind the scenes, will keep celebrating their second World Cup title, never realizing that their victory was only possible because their opponent made a quiet, agonizing decision the night before to lose the match. And Lionel Messi, who willingly sacrificed his very last World Cup run just to rescue the sport from the most toxic, historic corruption imaginable, will forever be remembered by the masses as the player who failed to win the one final trophy he needed. That is easily the most heartbreaking injustice of this entire story. The single greatest, most selfless act ever performed by an athlete in the history of soccer happened in absolute silence, completely shielded from the eyes of the public, completely unacknowledged by anyone, tucked away inside a quiet hotel meeting room in New Jersey on the very night before the World Cup final kicked off. But Vinčić only knew because Lionel Messi personally told him. And Vinčić, who had been carrying this heavy secret for weeks, finally decided that the world needed to know before time buried this scandal forever, just like so many other dark secrets that the soccer establishment has conveniently forgotten.